The city breathed its nightly sigh of exhaust fumes and distant sirens, a lullaby for the damned and a call to arms for the wicked. In the heart of this concrete jungle, encased in a penthouse of steel and bulletproof glass, Yekaterina Katya Sergeyevna Volkova was the silent, still heart of the storm. The world below, with its flickering lights and scurrying ants, was hers by right of blood and sheer, unassailable will. Her office was a temple to this cold divinity, no plush carpets or oak desks, just polished concrete floors that echoed every step, minimalist furniture that offered no comfort, and a single, vast window that presented the city like a possession laid at her feet. The air smelled of cold espresso and gun oil. She stood before that window, a statue carved from marble and platinum. Her hair, the color of winter moonlight, was pulled back in a severe braid that sharpened the already knife-like lines of her cheekbones. Her eyes, a glacial blue, reflected the city's lights but absorbed none of their warmth. She was the Pakhan, the boss, a title earned not from a dead father, but torn from the throats of men who had underestimated the daughter, the woman, they had deemed too soft to lead. She had proven them wrong in the most permanent ways possible. A single, discreet chime broke the silence. A hidden door slid open and her consigliere, an old man named Anatoly with a face like a crumpled map and eyes that had seen too much, entered. He did not speak. He simply placed a tablet on the cold steel table before her. On it was a single, damning line of text. The Orsino family has a key to our house. A mole. A traitor nestled deep within her organization, poised to hand her empire to a rival syndicate known for its brutish, unsophisticated greed. A lesser leader would have raged. Katya's lips merely tightened by a fraction of a millimeter. The shipment from Odessa arrives in 72 hours, she stated, her voice low and devoid of inflection. We cannot secure it with a snake in our walls. We need an outsider. Someone they cannot predict, cannot trace, and will not see coming. Anatoly nodded slowly. I may have someone. A ghost. He tends bar under a false name in the dockside district. His past is a void. But the whispers, the old whispers, say he was once known as Wraith. Katya turned from the window, her gaze pinning Anatoly in place. Find him. Make the offer. The air in the rusty nail was thick with the smell of stale beer and despair. It was a place for people who wanted to be forgotten, and Cade Thorne was its perfect caretaker. He moved behind the scarred wooden bar with a quiet economy of motion, his green eyes constantly scanning the dim room, missing nothing. He was a man built of quiet tension, his lean frame coiled like a spring even in repose. 2 years. 2 years of looking over his shoulder, of jumping at shadows, of using the razor-sharp reflexes that had once made him a legend in the darkest corners of the world only to break up a drunken brawl before it could truly start. He was a sculptor who now only used his tools to mold clay. When Anatoly, looking profoundly out of place in his tailored suit, slid into a bar stool and made the offer, Cade's response was a flat, immediate refusal. You have the wrong guy. The pay was astronomical. The clean slate was a siren's song. But it meant stepping back into the world he'd fled, the world where he had finally, devastatingly, met his match and chosen to run. The memory was a fresh wound he kept picking at. He thought that was the end of it. He was wrong. Later, as he was locking up, turning the key in the heavy deadbolt, a voice cut through the damp alleyway, as crisp and cold as the night air. Running is a habit, I see. He spun around. She stood there, flanked by 2 shadows who melted into the darkness. Katya Volkova. She was smaller than he'd imagined, yet she seemed to dominate the very space around her, pulling all the light and sound into her orbit. Her ice-blue eyes swept over him, from his worn boots to his wary face, dissecting him, dismissing the bartender and seeing only the ghost he used to be. I'm retired, Cade said, his voice tighter than he intended. Men like you don't retire, Mr. Thorne. They hide. She took a single step forward, and he instinctively took a half step back, a reaction that sent a spike of self-loathing through him. Your trauma is not my concern. Your skills are. There is a job. One night. The pay will set you up for life, far from here. A real life. I said no. She was in front of him then, so close he could smell the faint, expensive scent of her perfume, something like frozen roses and gunmetal. Her gaze was absolute, offering no quarter. Let me be perfectly clear. This was not a request. Be at the South Pier, Warehouse 7, Tomorrow night at 8. Do not be late. She didn't wait for a reply. She turned, her coat swirling around her, and was gone, leaving nothing but her command hanging in the air and the unsettling certainty in Cade's gut that his life of quiet hiding was over. The storm had found him, and its name was Katya. The south pier was a skeletal finger of concrete and creosote-soaked wood jutting into the oil-slicked, restless water of the harbor. A cold, biting wind whipped in from the sea, carrying the mournful cries of gulls and the distant, industrial groan of a departing freighter. Warehouse 7 loomed ahead, a hulking monolith of rusted corrugated steel, its windows blinded by grime and age. It was a place of endings, not beginnings, a place where things were forgotten or disposed of. For Cade, standing in its long, grasping shadow, it felt like a perfect monument to his own precipitous decline. The weight of the pistol holstered beneath his jacket was an unwelcome ghost, a sensation he had tried to bury alongside the name Wraith. He had arrived at 10 minutes to 8, not out of eagerness, but from a deeply ingrained habit of surveillance, of learning the landscape before the battle. He knew he was being watched long before he saw the watchers. Inside, the warehouse was a cathedral of decay and potential violence. The air was thick with the smells of salt, damp rot, and the sharp, coppery tang of old rust. High above, a few bare bulbs hung from frayed wires, casting a sickly, jaundiced light that created more shadows than it dispelled. In the center of the vast, echoing space stood Katya, a stark anomaly of sharp lines and controlled power. She was dressed not for a battlefield, but for a boardroom that had been evacuated prior to an explosion. Tailored black trousers, a sleek turtleneck, a long, dark coat that hinted at armor rather than fashion. She did not acknowledge his entrance. Her attention was on the 6 men who formed a loose, hostile semicircle around her. These were her inner circle, the Volkova syndicate's hardened core. Cade recognized the type immediately. They had the eyes of predators who had been at the top of their food chain for too long, their suspicion of him a palpable, living thing in the cavernous space. Anatoly stood slightly apart, a silent, mournful spectator. The others were younger, their brutality not yet tempered by time. A massive man with a shaved head and a neck thicker than Cade's thigh, Ivan. A lean, wiry one with quick, darting eyes and scars on his knuckles, Alexei. They were the most obvious in their disdain, but all of them shared it. He was an impurity, an unknown variable inserted into their precise, violent equation. The perimeter is a child's game, Katya stated, her voice cutting through the damp chill, not raised, but carrying with the clarity of a struck bell. She was addressing her men, but the critique was a performance for Cade. A single approach road. 2 men on the roof, their silhouettes visible against the skyline from a kilometer away. Predictable. She finally turned her glacial gaze to Cade. Thorne, your assessment. It was a test, a gauntlet thrown down in front of an audience already baying for his blood. Cade kept his own voice low, neutral. The roof is a trap, not a position. It offers no cover and isolates your men. A diversionary attack there pins them down while the real threat comes from the water. He gestured with his chin towards a row of crumbling loading bays that opened onto the black, lapping water of the harbor. That's the blind spot. That's where they'll come from. Ivan let out a derisive snort. The water is 10 meters deep there. A suicide approach. For amateurs, Cade replied, his eyes still on Katya. For professionals, it's the only approach that makes sense. Katya's expression did not change, but a flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps, crossed her features. The plan remains. Ivan, Alexei, you have the roof. The rest, standard positions along the road. I want the Orsino scouts to see what we want them to see. A show of predictable force. She was dismissing his input, reasserting her absolute authority in front of her men. It was a calculated power play, and Cade felt a familiar, cold resignation settle in his gut. He was here to be a prop, a lucky charm, not a strategist. The subtle shift in the body language of the others confirmed it. He had been put in his place. The meeting dissolved. The men moved to their positions with a grim, practiced efficiency, leaving Cade standing alone with Katya for a moment. The space between them was charged with a silent, mutual contempt. She saw a broken, hesitant man hiding behind a famous name. He saw an arrogant commander leading her soldiers into a slaughter out of pride. He turned without a word and moved to the shadows near a stack of rotting cargo crates, his chosen vantage point. He would do the job. He would take the money. And he would disappear. That was the only plan that mattered now. The wait was an eternity of cold and creeping dread. The wind moaned through gaps in the walls. Somewhere, a loose piece of metal clanged with a funereal rhythm. Cade's senses, long dormant, were screaming. He could feel the wrongness in the air, a pressure change preceding a storm. He watched the road, a strip of cracked asphalt bleached bone white by the moon. He watched the water, a shifting, inky blackness that seemed to absorb the very light. He saw nothing, and that was what terrified him. A professional operation was always invisible until it was too late. Then it happened. Not from the road, not from the water, but from the goddamn road. A brutish, obvious approach, just as Katya had predicted. A single, unmarked van screeched to a halt 100 meters from the warehouse doors. Too easy. It was the cheese in the trap. As if on cue, the first shots rang out from the roof, Ivan and Alexei, following their orders, engaging the obvious threat. Their muzzle flashes were bright, strobing beacons in the night. Cade's blood went cold. This was wrong. This was all wrong. He was about to shout a warning, a futile gesture across the distance, when the world exploded. The attack didn't come from the van. It came from the sea, just as he had feared, but not from the water. From the rooftops of the dilapidated pilings houses that stood on stilts over the harbor, directly opposite the warehouse's water-facing side. Muzzle flashes erupted from a dozen new points, higher than their own roof, a devastating crossfire. The shooters had been waiting, letting the Volkov team reveal their positions. In an instant, the warehouse was a drum being beaten by a madman, the roar of automatic gunfire deafening, the concrete around him chipping and spitting sharp fragments. He saw Ivan stumble and fall back on the roof, a dark stain spreading on his shoulder. They were pinned, just as Cade had said they would be. He looked for Katya. She was standing her ground, a pistol in her hand, firing controlled, precise shots towards the pilings houses, but she was exposed, a queen in the center of a collapsing board. A new sound cut through the chaos, the guttural roar of powerful engines. Two black SUVs, having used the initial diversion to race down the approach road, now slammed to a halt between the warehouse and the escape vehicles. Men in tactical gear poured out, using the vans for cover, their fire now adding a third, closing vector. They were being enveloped, annihilated. Cade's mind, for a terrifying second, was a sheet of white noise. The sound, the confusion, the smell of cordite. It was a perfect echo of the night that had broken him. The night he had run. He felt the old fear, cold and paralyzing, clutch at his throat. His muscles tensed, screaming at him to flee, to find a crack in the world and vanish into it. His eyes snapped to Katya. She was shouting orders he couldn't hear, her face a mask of furious defiance, but he saw the flicker in her eyes, the instant calculation of their hopeless position. She was going to die here. They were all going to die here, for a plan he knew was flawed, for a pride he had warned against. Something in him broke, but it wasn't his resolve. It was the dam holding back the man he used to be. The fear was still there, a screaming animal in his chest, but it was now caged by a colder, more ferocious instinct. He wasn't Wraith anymore, but he wasn't a coward. He was a survivor. He moved. He didn't run away. He ran towards her, a low, weaving sprint across the bullet-raked floor. He didn't draw his own weapon. He didn't engage the enemy. His goal was singular. He reached her just as a burst of fire chewed up the concrete where she had been standing a second before. He didn't ask. He didn't speak. He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron, and yanked her off her feet, pulling her behind a thick, steel support pillar. For a single, suspended moment, they were pressed together in the scant cover. The world was a maelstrom of noise and violence just inches away. He could feel the rapid, bird-like flutter of her heart against his chest, or maybe it was his own. He could smell her perfume, the frozen roses, now mingled with the acrid scent of gunpowder and her own shock. Her ice-blue eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a stunned, incandescent fury at his manhandling. Her composure, her absolute control, had been shattered. He didn't look at her. His eyes were scanning, calculating. Their cars were blocked. The roof was a death trap. The water was the only way out. He saw a rusted, metal service door near the loading bays, half hidden behind a collapsed forklift. The driver, he shouted directly into her ear, his voice a raw, guttural command that brooked no argument. "Tell him to get to the secondary vehicle. The one you always have. The one you didn't tell anyone about. Now!" The shock in her eyes crystallized into something else, a razor-sharp, instantaneous understanding. She barked a single, coded phrase into her comms. Cade didn't wait. Keeping his body between her and the heaviest field of fire, he pulled her with him, half dragging, half carrying her towards the service door. He kicked it open, the rusted lock snapping like a dry twig, and shoved her through into the relative safety of a narrow, dark alley that ran behind the warehouse. A second later, a sleek, nondescript sedan squealed around the corner, the back door already swinging open. He all but threw her inside, diving in after her as the car accelerated, the door slamming shut from the momentum. The silence inside the soundproofed cabin was as jarring as the gunfire had been. They were thrown against each other again as the driver executed a violent, evasive turn. Cade's arm was braced against the seat, caging her in, his body shielding hers from the window. Her breath was coming in sharp, ragged gasps, her perfect bray coming undone, strands of platinum hair sticking to her damp forehead. The furious, regal Packhand was gone. In her place was a woman, breathing the same air of near-death, her gaze locked on his with an intensity that was no longer just anger, but a raw, unnerving, and utterly terrifying curiosity. The ghost of the killer he was had just saved her life, and in the violent, intimate confines of that fleeing car, the carefully constructed wall between the Runaway and the Queen developed its first, irrevocable crack. The silence inside the armored sedan was a physical presence, thick and heavy, broken only by the hum of the engine and the frantic, almost musical rhythm of their breathing. The car, a secondary vehicle whose existence Cade had correctly deduced, was a vault on wheels, sealing them away from the chaotic symphony of violence they had just escaped. The driver, a grim-faced man named Gregor, navigated the back alleys with a preternatural calm, his eyes constantly flicking to the mirrors, executing a complex, evasive route back to the heart of Katya's domain. Cade slowly, deliberately, peeled himself away from her. The heat of their forced proximity lingered on his skin like a brand. He straightened, wincing as a sharp pain flared in his side, a souvenir from being thrown against the steel pillar or the car door. He wasn't sure. He focused on the pain, using it as an anchor to steady the tremor in his hands, to rebuild the walls that had so nearly crumbled back in the warehouse. He stared out the tinted window at the blur of the sleeping city, refusing to look at her, refusing to acknowledge the seismic shift that had just occurred in the space between them. Katya was doing the same. She smoothed her hair back with a hand that betrayed the faintest unsteadiness, her fingers meticulously tucking the stray platinum strands back into the compromised braid. It was an act of reclamation, of reassembling her armor piece by piece. The stunned, wide-eyed fury had been schooled back into her customary mask of icy composure, but the effort was visible in the tight line of her jaw, the whiteness of her knuckles as she clenched her hands in her lap. The Packhand was returning, but the ghost of the woman who had been manhandled and saved against her will still haunted the edges of her eyes. She had been wrong. Catastrophically, publicly wrong. And the man who had proven it was sitting inches from her, smelling of gunpowder and the cold night air, a living, breathing testament to her failure in judgment. Not a single word passed between them for the entire journey. The unspoken things hung in the air, more volatile than the bullets they'd just dodged. His prescience about the attack vector. His insubordination that had saved her life. The raw, unvarnished instinct that had taken over when her own precise plans had turned to ash. The car finally descended into the subterranean garage of her skyscraper, the silence deepening as the heavy security gates hissed shut behind them, sealing them in a tomb of concrete and steel. They exited the vehicle, the sound of the car doors closing echoing like gunshots in the vast, empty space. Still, no words. She led the way to a private elevator, her spine ramrod straight. He followed, his own posture a mirror of guarded tension. The elevator ascended in a whisper, the digital numbers climbing in a silent countdown. When the doors slid open directly into her penthouse, she finally spoke, her voice carefully modulated, stripped of all emotion. This way. It was not an invitation. It was a command. She led him not to her office or a sitting area, but down a hallway to a door that blended seamlessly into the wall, opening to a biometric scanner. She placed her palm on it. A soft beep, a click, and the door slid open to reveal her sanctum sanctorum, the armory. It was not a dusty rack of rifles. It was a gallery of lethal art. The lighting was cool and clinical, highlighting the polished, blued steel and rich, oiled wood of the weapons displayed on felt-lined racks and in illuminated glass cases. They were custom pistols, precision sniper rifles disassembled in foam-lined boxes. But the centerpiece, the true objects of veneration, were the blades. Dozens of them. Daggers, stilettos, push daggers, karambits, each a masterpiece of form and murderous function. She walked to a central case and retrieved a piece without hesitation. It was a slender, wicked stiletto, its blade a shard of darkness, its hilt intricately carved from obsidian. "You were right about the water," she stated, her back to him. The admission was like pulling teeth, each word costing her. "Your assessment was correct. My plan was flawed." She turned, the dagger held loosely, naturally, in her hand. It was an extension of her, as much a part of her as her own limb. But being right about a threat is one thing. Neutralizing it is another. Her movement was a blur. 1 second the dagger was in her hand, the next it was a spinning vortex of steel and shadow, flipping over her knuckles, dancing between her fingers with a fluid, practiced grace that spoke of a lifetime of dedication. It wasn't a showy performance. It was a statement of capability, a reassertion of power in a language he understood perfectly. The message was clear. I am not a damsel to be saved. I am the most dangerous thing in any room I walk into. Cade watched, his own body still. He didn't flinch. He didn't react. He simply absorbed the display, his professional respect for her skill warring with his lingering anger at her earlier dismissal. "A plan that gets your men killed is more than flawed," he said, his voice low. "It's arrogance." The dagger stopped its dance, the point coming to rest aimed subtly in his direction. Her eyes narrowed. "I do not require a lesson in tactics from a man who makes a habit of disappearing from fights." The blow landed, precisely aimed at his deepest wound. He felt the old shame flare, hot and acidic. He took a step forward, into the space of the armory, into her space. "I'm here, aren't I? For a paycheck. Is that what you tell yourself?" he countered, his gaze sweeping over the arsenal, then back to her. "That this is just a transaction. You have a traitor. A mole who knew your primary positions, who knew you'd take the bait of that van. He's in your inner circle. He's probably one of the men who was in that warehouse tonight. And you're in here, playing with knives." The air crackled. The accusation hung between them, more dangerous than any blade in the room. For a long moment, she just stared at him, the dagger still in her hand. The truth of his words was a poison, and he had just forced her to drink it. The regal mask slipped again, revealing the ruthless pragmatist beneath. The woman who had clawed her way to the top of a mountain of corpses. Slowly, deliberately, she placed the stiletto back in its case. The soft click of the latch was deafening. "Then find him," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was colder and more threatening than any shout. "You have 24 hours. Use whatever resources you need. But if you are wrong," she turned her full, glacial gaze upon him, "the consequences will be transactional." She turned and walked out of the armory, leaving him alone amidst the glittering, silent instruments of death. The door hissed shut behind her. Cade stood there, the scent of frozen roses and gun oil filling his lungs. The game had changed. It was no longer about survival or a paycheck. It was a hunt, and he had just been handed the leash. The weight of it was terrifying, but for the first time in 2 years, the ghost of Wraith felt not like a curse, but a key. He had her permission to tear her world apart, and he knew, with a chilling certainty, that he would. The penthouse was a fortress of silence in the hours that followed, a stark contrast to the violent chaos they had narrowly escaped. Cade did not sleep. He retreated to the sterile, minimalist guest suite he had been assigned, a room that felt more like a high-end hotel than a home, devoid of any personal touch or history. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a gritty exhaustion and the persistent, dull ache in his side. But his mind was a live wire, sparking and circling the problem. The mole. The traitor. He sat in the dark, the city's neon glow painting faint stripes across the floor, and he let the warehouse play back in his mind, frame by bloody frame. He started with the men. Ivan, the brute, loyal to a fault, his aggression a blunt instrument. Alexei, the wiry fighter, quick and vicious. The others, their faces a blur of suspicion and hardened professionalism. He replayed their positions, their reactions. Who had looked a little too calm? Who had been a little too eager? It was useless. In the heat of an ambush, everyone's face was a mask of survival. He needed a different angle. He needed the one thing he had walked away from 2 years ago, his past. With a grimace that was part pain, part resignation, he powered on a heavily encrypted, disposable laptop provided by Anatoly. The dark web was a country he knew as well as his own reflection, its shadowy avenues and backalley forums as familiar as the lines on his own palms. It took him less than an hour to find what he was looking for, a ghost of a rumor on a message board dedicated to freelance security contractors. A whisper about a new, high-paying benefactor looking for talent, someone who valued discretion over flash. The contact method was a scrambled relay, but the digital fingerprint, the specific way the offer was structured, had the subtle, arrogant signature of the Orsino family. They were recruiting, aggressively, and they were being unusually careful. This was the crack. He spent the next several hours, as the false dawn bled into the real one, exploiting it. He used old protocols, call signs he hadn't uttered in years, reaching out to the few ghosts from his past who weren't dead or actively trying to kill him. He wasn't Wraith, not really, but he wore his skin like a familiar coat, the cadence of his digital voice shifting, becoming colder, more assured. He posed as a disgruntled Volkov soldier, looking to jump ship after the clusterfuck at the pier. The information he offered was just tantalizing enough to be credible. Specific details about the warehouse layout, the number of men, things an insider would know, things the Orsinos would already possess, confirming his story. The bait was taken. A meeting was proposed. Neutral ground. A data drop. It was a start. But it wasn't enough. He needed a name. He needed the source. He leaned back, his eyes burning from the screen's blue light. The pieces were in motion, but the board was still shrouded in fog. He needed to see her. He needed to see how she ruled her broken kingdom. He found her in her office at first light. She was at her steel desk, the city spread out behind her, a panorama of her dominion. She looked as if she had not slept, but there was no trace of fatigue in her bearing. The platinum braid was restored to its severe perfection, her makeup flawless, her attire a uniform of black and grey. She was the Pac-Han once more, the vulnerability of the previous night locked away in a vault deep behind her eyes. She was reviewing security footage from the warehouse, her expression unreadable as she watched her men get pinned down, watched herself almost get killed. She didn't look up as he entered. "Report." "I've made contact," he said, his voice rough from disuse and coffee. "The Orsinos are recruiting. They are being careful, but they are hungry. I've posed as a defector. There's a data handoff set for tonight." This made her look up. Her gaze was analytical, assessing. "A risk. If they see through you, then we'll know they are smarter than they look." He walked closer to the desk, his presence an intrusion in her sterile space. "I need access to your personnel files. Everyone who was at the warehouse. Their financials, their comms logs, their known associates." A flicker of something, not resistance, but a profound, ingrained reluctance, crossed her features. To give him this was to hand him the keys to her kingdom, to admit she could not find the snake in her own garden. It was the ultimate act of trust, or the ultimate act of desperation. She held his gaze for a long, tense moment, the silence stretching between them. Finally, she gave a single, sharp nod. "Anatoly will provide you with what you need. He is the only one outside of myself who has full access. He is cleared." It was the first real trust she had shown him, and the weight of it was immense. He gave a curt nod in return, the only acknowledgement he could offer. The transaction was complete. He turned to leave. The gala, her voice stopped him at the door. He glanced back. She was no longer looking at him, but out at the city, her profile sharp and unyielding. The annual charity event at the Grand Meridian. It's in 2 nights. It is the most high-profile gathering of the city's elite. A show of strength is required. A show of normalcy. You will attend as my head of security. And, she paused, the word hanging in the air, as my escort. We will be a couple for the evening. The statement was so absurd, so utterly divorced from the reality of their situation, hunted, betrayed, circling each other like feral cats, that he almost laughed. A couple. It is a necessary fiction, she said, her tone leaving no room for debate. The Orsinos will be watching. They will expect fear, retreat. I will give them confidence. I will give them you. A new, unknown element at my side. It will make them nervous. And nervous men make mistakes. She finally turned her head, her eyes meeting his. Can you play the part, Mr. Thorne? The challenge was layered, a test within a test. Could he wear the mask of a civilized man? Could he stand beside her in a world of silk and champagne, while the world they truly inhabited festered in the shadows? He held her gaze, the memory of their bodies pressed together in the fleeing car flashing between them, a secret, shade current of electricity. I'll manage, he said, his voice flat. He spent the rest of the day buried in the lives of Katya's most trusted men, the cold, hard data provided by a grim-faced Anatoly. He saw their salaries, their debts, their mistresses. He saw the mundane details of their lives. And he saw nothing. No large, unexplained deposits. No suspicious travel. The mole was good, professional. He was burying his tracks deep. Frustration was a slow-burning fuse inside him. As evening fell, he prepared for the data handoff, a meeting in a soulless, automated parking garage where a flash drive would be left in the slot of a specific car. It was a dead man's switch, a transaction with no faces. It was as he was running a final diagnostic on his comms equipment, a tiny, custom-built receiver, that he found it. It wasn't in the financials. It wasn't in the travel logs. It was in the silence. He cross-referenced the comms logs from the night of the ambush with the logs from a routine security patrol the week before. The pattern was subtle, almost invisible. A specific, encrypted frequency, used only for top-priority Volkova communications, had been active for a 3-minute window just before the attack. It was a test pulse, a systems check. According to the logs, the signal had originated from the lead car in Katya's motorcade, the driver's comms unit. The same driver, a man named Dimitri, who had been at the wheel of the sedan that had whisked them to safety. The man who had known their escape route. Cade sat back, the truth settling over him like a shroud. It wasn't one of the soldiers. It was the quiet, unassuming driver. The man with access to every movement, every schedule. The man everyone overlooked. He had not only set the ambush, he had been their getaway driver, a perfect position to monitor the fallout and report back. The sheer, chilling audacity of it was breathtaking. He didn't go to the data handoff. It was a trap, or a wild goose chase set by Dimitri to misdirect them. Instead, he went to find Katya. He found her not in her office, but on the penthouse's vast, empty terrace, standing at the railing, the wind whipping strands of her hair free from its braid. She looked less like a kingpin there, and more like a solitary queen surveying a kingdom that was trying to devour her. He told her. He laid out the evidence, the cold, logical sequence of data points that led to one inescapable conclusion. He expected fury, a swift, brutal order for execution. She listened in silence, her back to him, her hands gripping the cold steel of the railing. When he finished, the only sound was the wind and the distant sigh of the city far below. She was utterly still for a long moment, a statue of contained violence. Then, she spoke, her voice so quiet it was almost carried away by the breeze. Dimitri, his wife. She was diagnosed with a rare cancer 6 months ago. The treatments, experimental. Extortionately expensive. She turned to face him, and the look in her eyes was not one of betrayal, but of a profound, weary sadness. I paid for them. All of them. The revelation landed like a physical blow. It wasn't greed or ambition. It was love. It was fear. The Orsinos hadn't bought Dimitri. They had leveraged him. They had found his one, irreducible point of weakness, and they had pressed. The horror of it, the brutal elegance, left Cade speechless. Katya's gaze hardened, the sadness burning away in a cold, clean fire. He will not be harmed. His wife will continue to receive the best care, anonymously. But he will be relocated. He will believe the Orsinos double-crossed him. Anatoly will see to it. Her eyes met Cade's, and in their depths, he saw the true, terrifying nature of her power. It wasn't just the willingness to kill. It was the willingness to be mercilessly, strategically merciful. To turn a betrayal into a weapon. This stays between us, she said, her tone absolute. No one else can know. It was a secret more intimate than any they had shared. They were now co-conspirators in a truth that could shatter the loyalty of her entire organization. He had handed her the traitor, and in doing so, she had handed him a piece of her soul, not the soft, vulnerable part, but the cold, calculating engine that drove her. He simply nodded, the bond between them forged not in the fire of the ambush, but in this quiet, devastating aftermath. The gala now loomed before them, no longer just a performance for their enemies, but a stage for the two of them, bound together by secrets and a shared, chilling understanding of the world they inhabited. The Grand Meridian Hotel was a universe of gilded opulence and whispered power, a stark, deliberate counterpoint to the world of warehouses and blood-soaked piers. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars dripped from vaulted ceilings, their light shimmering across acres of polished marble and the glittering jewels of the city's elite. The air was a thick perfume of expensive champagne, rare flowers, and the subtle, intoxicating scent of old money. It was a stage, and every person in the ballroom was a player, their smiles masks, their laughter a carefully orchestrated soundtrack. For Katya Volkova, it was the most dangerous battlefield she would walk onto all week. She made her entrance, and the room subtly shifted. Conversations dipped. Eyes, some admiring, some fearful, some openly hostile, tracked her progress. She was a symphony in midnight blue silk, a gown that was both armor and invitation, its high neckline and long sleeves speaking of a regal modesty that was utterly betrayed by the way the fabric clung to her every curve and the daring slash of her back. Her platinum hair was coiled into an intricate crown of braids, severe and elegant. She was every inch the untouchable pack-hand, a queen moving among her uneasy subjects. And at her side, a pace behind and to her left, was Cade. In a tailored black tuxedo that fit his lean frame like a second skin, he was a different man. The coiled tension of the street fighter was still there, but it had been polished, refined into a watchful, predatory stillness. His green eyes, no longer hiding in shadows, scanned the crowd with a cold, analytical precision, missing nothing. He was playing his part, the new, enigmatic head of security, the unknown variable at the Volkova queen's right hand. The fiction of their partnership was a tangible thing between them, a forced proximity that was its own special kind of torture. The evening was a minefield of polite fictions. Katya moved through the crowd with a glacial grace, exchanging air kisses and meaningless pleasantries with politicians, bankers, and rival syndicate heads who smiled with their teeth while their eyes promised murder. Cade was her shadow, a silent, imposing presence. His role was to intimidate with his silence, to be the physical manifestation of her strengthened guard.